In this video, I'm going to show you how to wire in a reversing camera to your Citroen Relay, Peugeot Boxer or Fiat Ducato. So let's have a look at what we've got in the contents. So these are the two boxes where I've got all the contents for this install. You can see here, we've got an original manufacturer's reversing mirror, and this will be installed to hold the 7-inch monitor for the reversing camera. And then we've purchased this 7-inch high brake light pillar reversing camera. Got an instruction manual there, and then if we take everything out, you can see we've got the actual monitor itself, which is a nice 7-inch display. There's some cables. You can see obviously there's a video cable there with some power connections. That's obviously the positive for the camera, the negative, and this green cable here is for an a reverse bulb feed. So that when the reverse gear is selected, the reversing channel on the monitor will automatically populate. You've got the replacement brake light itself, which has the camera mounted inside it, and that's obviously got the camera female connection, which will connect to the monitor, and it has obviously a positive and a negative cable, which is for the actual operation of the light itself. So this positive and negative will have to connect to the vehicle wiring loom and connect that onto the brake light cables. We've got an extension cord. I think this is about 10 meters long, so that we can run the connection from the back of the van at the high brake to the front of the van where the monitor is going to be. There's a small remote control, some butterfly nuts and some washers and lock washers, and then this rubber seal, which is obviously going to go around the actual light fitting itself. So the first thing to do is to remove the existing brake light using a Phillips screwdriver. This is a large number 3 Phillips head. You can use this in the actual screws itself. There are some bolts on the inside, so you'll need to obviously go into the back of this brake to actually release the bolts that these screw into. So I'll just remove this now and show you what it looks like. I've removed those screws now. You can see the light fitting itself just comes loose and pulls out of the actual hole. There we go. And that's the connection. And you can see we've got these threaded female receivers that are bolted through the metal itself. So I'm just going to go around the other side with a number 10 spanner and remove the nuts off the back of that fitting so that we can clear this. So this is looking at it from the other side. You can see we've got the nut holding that into position. So I'll just use a number 10 spanner to loosen that nut and remove that fitting. So that's the right side done. Now time to move on to the left side, which you can see there. So there's the old light fitting, and here's the new light fitting with the additional reversing camera. You see the slight difference in that the male threaded part here is actually fixed in to the actual fitting itself, and then essentially we need to use some butterfly nuts with a washer and a lock washer on there to secure that into position, whereas on here we obviously had these female threads clamped into the van and then the screws on the front fixing that into position. That's why we needed to remove these extra pieces to allow a hole for these male threads to pass through. So I'll go and put this into position now and screw up the butterfly wing nuts from behind. Before I put this on, I'm just going to give the area a clean with some alcohol, and then put the rubber gasket fitting onto the metal so that it provides a waterproof seal and prevents any ingress of rain and dirt. This is the panel wipe that I'm using. I just get a 5-litre bottle of this. It's used for sort of degreasing anything before we cut into the metal, or just cleaning the metal of the van from oily substitutes. This is just a cotton rag we apply it with. Yeah, really good product, and makes it nice and clean before adhesive goes on it. So you can see there's some residue, some dirt marks left around the van metal. I've just got a white cloth with some panel wipe. I'm just going to give that a good clean. Get rid of all of that residue. Make sure that the surface is nice and clean so that the adhesive will stick on when I put the new rubber sort of gap. Before I put the brake light pillar on, I'm just going to make the electrical connection onto the red and black cable on the brake light itself, and just check that that's functioning correctly. This comes with the wiring comes with a plug, but that's not compatible with the light that we've got, so we're going to take the plug off. We're going to cut the negative and the positive cables separately. Don't cut them together because you'll short the circuit and blow the fuse. So whenever you're cutting cables, cut them one at a time. So you can see I've cut off the plug from the wiring loom. Like I said, I've done them one at a time. And what I also like to do is just cut the positive a slightly different length to the negative, just so that there's no risk of creating a short circuit because there's a physical difference in size. What I'll do now is I'll just strip off the insulation and put a female spade crimp onto each of these. I also like to put, so this is going to be a red spade, female. I also like to put the female crimps on the supply side of the circuit. As these are connected to the battery, I like to use the insulated crimps so that there's no exposed conductors at any point. And then I'll use the male spades on the actual appliance itself, so on the actual brake light cables. So I've just crimped on the male spade terminals to the actual brake light itself. Again, you can see I've just made a bit of physical separation from the positive and negative. Not that these have got live current going through them, it's just good practice really. I like to have the males on the actual appliance and then the females that are insulated on the supply side of the connection. I've just used these ratchet crimping tools, which are obviously specifically sized for the red terminal crimps, and they give a nice double crimp, you can see on there. And with every crimp that I make, I give everything a little, call it a tug test. Just pull the cable and the terminal apart and give it a little pull, and it should remain firm with no movement at all. So I'll just put that up, connect the males into the females, and then wrap everything up with some fabric tape, and the connection will be then good to test. So that's the connection made. The red positive cable from the light joins the yellow and white positive cable from the vehicle loom, and the black cable connects to the black negative on the loom as well. I'll just tape these up with fabric tape, but before I do that, I'm going to go turn the engine on and press my foot on the brake and see if this lights up. So foot down and off, on and off. So I hope you saw that, but I'm happy that the connection is good. Before I fabric tape this connection, I'm just going to use my heat gun and some heat shrink to separate them with some more insulation. Now I'm going to use some electrical fabric tape to tape up, and that will connect to the loom. And that's all taped up now, which finishes the connections for the actual light section of the brake light camera. I'll now fit the fitting into here and do up the butterfly nuts on the rear side so that the light is secured in place. I'm now going to be putting the butterfly nut on the back of the male thread, which is on the inside of the van. So I'll just show you on the table because it's a bit easier, the order. We put the washer on first, then the lock nut washer or split ring washer, and then finally we do up the butterfly nut. And because this isn't a nylock nut or anything, it needs that split ring washer to stop this from vibrating loose. So that split ring washer is really important, and this is the order that they go on. On the inside of the van now, you can see there's only one cable hanging through, which is obviously the camera feed. So we'll run that and the extension cable in a minute, but I can just show you these butterfly nuts, 1 and 2, with the washer and lock washer, and that's secured. Oh, this is the actual loom itself, you know, the connection that I made with the fabric tape. And then on the outside of the van, you can see there's your light with the camera. There is some adjustment, so you can move the camera, but you want it looking straight down at the bumper so you can see how far to go back. This is a coil of the rubber U-trim that I was talking about. You can just purchase this when you buy your windows, and I like to use some of this as well to add some rubber anti-chafing parts to where my cable runs are going. So for example, I'll just show you on here. This cable here is obviously part of the wiring loom. There was an internal light. It's got the single core cables which are insulated, and then their second means of mechanical protection is obviously this fabric tape around the outside to form that second layer. But what you could do is you could always put this rubber trim on the edges to obviously reduce that risk of metal rubbing the insulation to expose the internal conductors. So yeah, just a handy little tip really to keep a roll of this for your conversion, and then you can always use it to put on the metal edges. So to overcome that issue, I've just stuffed that hole with some of this plastic conduit. This is actually corrugated waste pipe. I think it's 23mm diameter, and it fits nicely through that hole there, just to provide it with a nice smooth surface on the inside for the cable so that there's no chafing on that metal. And there you can see the cable pulled through. Perfect. When doing your cable runs in the van, you're going to come across some really tight areas, bits where there's corners or awkward spaces that you need your cable to go through. So you're going to need to use some sort of method to fish the cable through that tight space. What I like to do is use a bit of 4mm sort of earth cable. I find this is the perfect sort of rigidity. It's not too stiff that it can't go around corners, but it's not too flexible that you can't push it along. So I use this 4mm cable as my sort of fishing rod, and I push it through those awkward spaces and then tape the original cable that I want to fish through that area to this fishing line. So this is the cable that I want to fish through, and I want to take it from this area here in this top piece of coving, and I want it to go down this pillar into this area here behind the curtain pelmet. And this is where I'm going to make the connection between the camera male and the AV female, where that white socket is. That's where this connection is going to be. And to do that, you can see I've fished that earthing cable up through this area here, and it's come out, and I've managed to pull it through. So I'll take this onto that cable now, pull it all the way down, and then as you look up, you can see the actual vehicle wiring loom, which is this one here, follows the same path as well. So sometimes when you're running your own leisure cables, try and look at where the vehicle wiring loom is running, and you can utilize some of the same spaces. And there you can see the cable which I've fished through. I've actually turned this around so that it's not like a square edge. It's more of an easier shape to pull through tight spaces. I've taped that on with that electrician's fabric tape again. Really good stuff. Loads of uses, not just taping up wiring looms, but if you ever cut your finger or anything, which I did the other day, put a bit of blue roll and some fabric tape. It makes a great plaster. But anyway, I'm off topic now. So yeah, that's gone through that corner piece there, and I'll just pull through all of this excess, and the excess I'll tuck away behind the panel here so that it's all safe. If it needs cable tiling, I'll cable tie that. One point to note is, because this is going quite a sharp bend and I don't know what's behind there in terms of any sharp metal, I'm going to just run a section of conduit just down there so that I form that extra protection to prevent chafing on this cable. So I've run that cable down through this elbow in the van. You can see it comes out here, which is where the termination is going to be made. I put it in that split conduit, and the split conduit obviously covers that whole area, so you don't have to run the whole cable in conduit, but just the bits that you're not sure about or where you think it's going to be passing over some rough metal, And what I've done is I've taped that in place so that conduit's not going to slide and move around at all. What we've got though is we've got all this excess. You see all this, probably 3 or 4 meters worth of excess. So I'll cable tie all of that and tuck that away securely so that it's not loose anywhere. So I'll do that now, and then we'll move on to the actual fitting of the monitor, connecting the camera cable and then running the power cable and the reverse light. So I'm now going to be working on the actual cable that runs from the monitor itself to the white AV connection. So I'm going to run the wire from the reverse camera monitor, which we obviously got to get that mount for, but I'll run it anyway, from that location along in the overhead lining into this corner here. And to prevent the cable from falling out, it can essentially tuck behind this lining here. I've just thickened it with some conduit so that when it tucks in, it's now not going to fall back out and droop down where the window is. So it'll be tucked nicely in this lining here along the corner and up to where the connections are made. So you can see obviously the monitor, I'm just waiting for the holder, and I'll get that attachment and get that mirror fitted so the monitor can sit there. I've just left the tape loose so you can see I've just made this connection here, which is obviously from the monitor itself to the actual extension piece. I'm going to tape that up with this fabric tape just so that that connection is less likely to pull apart. So I'll tape that up, and then I've run that bit of conduit all along the front of this lining, and you have to just remove obviously this plastic trim piece which has some of the wiring loom in it anyway. And then you can see this is my piece of cable with the AV connection. And what I'll do now is I've taken the door rubber off so I can access behind the lining here and then make that connection. Just one additional point to note, obviously this red positive cable is a bit shorter than these two. That's because I snipped off the inline fuse. This is a 2 amp fuse that would have sat on that cable there, tucked away, hidden from view. And if this had blown and the monitor stopped working, it might be hard to sort of trace where this fuse is located. So essentially I'm going to run the positive cable back to the 12 volt fuse board and have a 2 amp fuse on that cable back closer towards the leisure battery itself, nearer to the supply. So yeah, 2 amp fuse, important to protect the appliance and the cable, but we'll put that blade fuse in line nearer to the battery. I've just cut 2 lengths of this 2mm flex cable. There's a positive and a negative terminal in there, and I'm going to run it now from the monitor connections. So we've got obviously a negative, a positive, and then a reverse trigger. I'm going to use the fishing method, using that bit of earth cable to tape these 4 cores up and then run it up to there in split conduit. And then obviously I'll run the 4 cables all the way to the back down to the rear light. And at that point I'm going to make some terminations. I'm going to split out the black cable to be a negative, and there's a negative point onto the chassis there. The second black cable of these 4 cores is going to be the reverse trigger, so I'm going to wire that into the light bulb for the reversing. And then the 2 red cables are going to be positive feed, so I'll then connect those 2 positive cables together and then run a 2 core positive cable down to the fuse box as well. I just prefer running sort of double insulated cable, so I don't want to run sort of a 2 core and then a single core all the way down, and I haven't got any 3 core on me, so I'm going to run it as 4 cores, but it's obviously got the inner sheath, the outer sheath, which gives that 2 forms of mechanical protection that you need. And obviously all the cable is stranded, so you don't want to use any rigid core cable in your motorhome. So I've run that 4 core cable all the way down, and these are the 2 ends here. So you've got the 4 cores, 2 positives, 2 negatives. I've used a female crimp to connect those 2 positives together, and this will obviously connect onto that single spade there. So that's the positive sorted all the way to the back. And then obviously with these two black cables, just try and zoom, what we're going to do is one of them is going to connect onto the negative, one of them is going to connect onto the trigger. So the one that connects onto the trigger, I'll obviously just mark that with a bit of tape so that when I come to making the termination at the back of the van, I know that the black cable with the tape on it is going to be for the reverse bulb, and then the other black cable is for the negative. So that's all the connections taped up now. In here, all tucked away. You can't actually see them. I've taped it up, the crimps, and I've tucked away the AV cable. The 4 cores are run up here in conduit, and the conduit you can see stops about here. And then I'm just going to run these along the top to the back where the battery is going to be, and the reverse bulb. And you can see I'm going to use the fishing cable. I've taped them, the 2 cores onto there. I'm just gonna, it's easier to run a single core, so I'll just run this single core through all of that coving piece and then down the pillar. So I'm now towards the back of the van, and I've brought the 4 cores all the way down into this rear brake light pillar now, where I'm gonna access the reversing light bulb. And what you can see is I've actually managed to get some cable ties. And when all my cables are run, I'll obviously tighten these up, and that secures the cable ties as a part of the standards. When you go in a vertical plane, your cable clippings have to be more frequent, every 250 mil. So we'll have a number of cable tie points down this pillar. And obviously when all the cables are run, we'll tighten those all up, and it will secure those cables to this pillar here. So what I'll do now is I've also got these are the cables that I've just run. You can see one of them I've got taped, which is going to be my reverse bulb feed. The black cable in there is the reverse bulb feed. So I'll take off the rear light now, and I'll show you how to locate the reverse bulb cable in this wiring loom here. To remove the light, we're going to need a 13mm socket and a small extension bar, and we're going to have to undo this nut here, and there's another nut down here that we need to undo. It was in fact a 17mm socket needed to remove the bolt. Sorry, the nut's a weird looking crimped nut like that. I'm just finishing off the second one now. I just undo that. You can see the light would start to come off. There we go. And then you can remove the light itself. And what we want to do is just remove the plug from the back of the light, and we'll get the light on the bench, and then essentially we trace what incoming cable, what terminal is going to the light bulb for the reversing sensor, because all of these terminals will basically go off to a different light. One of them will be a brake light, one of them will be an indicator, one of them will be a reversing bulb, and that's the one that will become live when you select the reverse gear. And then we'll note the color, and then we'll tap into that with our signal cable that we've taped up. So I've got the rear light on the bench, and I'm going to use a Phillips 2 screwdriver just to remove these screws from the back cover. I'll do that now, and then I'll show you what the insides look like. So that's the two parts separated, and what we want to do is check the reverse bulb. Look at this is the reverse bulb here, and that lines up with this bulb here. So if we look at the connections where they come in to the light, we've got the reverse bulb here. Obviously there's going to be a positive and a negative, so all of the bulbs are going to have a common negative. So if I look at this metal strip here connects both this bulb and this bulb and this bulb and this bulb and this bulb. So that's the negative, because it's common to all of the bulbs on the back. So the negative connection is going to be going in to the bottom left as I'm looking at it now, but the bottom right as you look at it when it plugs in from the back. So the bottom right connection, this bottom right pin is your negative feed. So where's the positive feed going? On your reverse bulb. So you see this metal strip here is going into this bulb. So that's the negative, that's the positive. So if I follow this metal strip, it's the bottom middle is going to the reverse light. So if I spin this around and look at these pins, there's 3 pins on the bottom. The middle one is the positive for the reverse bulb, and obviously that's the negative. So I'll look at the plug now. Let's have a look. So the plug goes in this way up. Looking underneath, you've got a black cable on the bottom right, which is there, and that's obviously the negative that I traced. The middle in the bottom, you can see it's a white and a green. So it's a white cable with a green stripe on it. That is your positive cable for your reverse bulb. What I'll do now is I'll put this back together, I'll get the light back on, and then we'll go back inside the van and I'll trace that white and green cable and make a splice. Looking back from the inside of the van, that's the plug for the rear brake light, or the light in the back. And I'm going to follow these cables and trace the loom back to an accessible part. So I've got the loom here. You can see it's split conduit. So I'm able to open the conduit up and get access to the loom inside. So these are all of the conductors that go into the light socket itself. And as we identified, the one that I need to splice into is the white and green cable. So this is going to become live when the ignition feed is on. Now what I'm going to use is a 3-way Wago connector. So I'll cut this, I'll strip it back, put these 2 ends into a Wago, and then the black cable that has got the tape on it is my feed for the monitor. I'll put this conductor into the 3rd terminal of the Wago and then tape that all up, and that's the connection made for the ignition feed. I'll then just connect the positive to the positive of this conductor and run the positive and negative down into the area where my fuse box is going to be. And that's the reverse signal and the power supply for the monitor, all connected and taped up. So we'll tuck that back away into the pillar and move on to the next bit of the install. Concludes this video of the reverse camera install for a Relay Ducato Boxer. I hope you enjoyed it. Please send me your comments, like and subscribe to our channel, and I'll post more videos to help out you self-builders.